Hello everyone, welcome to today's tutorial on the poem Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas, which is a moving poem that defines death and tells readers to defy it and rage against it for as long as possible. You may wish to pause this video at certain points to take note of some of the annotations I've made on the poem. Dylan Thomas is thought to have written this poem while considering his father's impending death. His father, David John Thomas, died in 1952, the year after Thomas published the poem. Due to the fact that the speaker mentions a father specifically in the final lines, has led many to believe that this is Thomas's father, making Dylan Thomas the speaker of the poem. There is no complete evidence that this is the case, though. More likely than anything, Thomas probably wrote this poem as a way of dealing with mortality more generally. It's something that everyone, no matter their profession, social status, or personal history, has to face. This is also the primary reason the poem has withstood the test of time and is as popular today as it is. The speaker spends most of the poem telling readers, and as it turns out their own father, not to give in to death peacefully and calmly. One shouldn't just accept that it's coming and go to it willingly. Good people resist until the last moment, knowing that there's more that they could do to improve the world. The same can be said for daring and energetic people who know how exciting and beautiful life can be. In the final stanza, the speaker turns to address someone personal in their lives, their father. This person is facing old age, and the speaker wants them to rage against the dark like everyone else. The principal idea for this poem is that human beings should resist death with all of their strength before the end. The poem includes the repetition of the line, "Do not go gentle into that good night," several times, a great example as a refrain. These lines act as a mirror for each other concerning their connotation. The first refrain has a calmer and more positive connotation to it, specifically by using the phrases gentle and good night. The second one, on the other hand, repeats the word rage and references the dying of the light, two much more grim ideas that are both expressions of the same idea as in the first one. The repetitive nature of these lines, as previously mentioned, conveys an aspect of obsession from the narrator on the topic. If the narrator is meant to be the voice of Dylan Thomas himself, then this could make sense in the light of his father's illness at the time of his creation for the work. Thomas engages with themes of death, defiance, and old age. All three of these themes are wrapped up in the speaker's declarations about death and how one should confront it. Throughout the first 5 stanzas of the poem, the speaker spends the lines generally talking about death and how one should stand up in the face of it. One should not go gentle into the darkness but rage against the dying of the light. Despite this, the poet acknowledges that death is universal. There's no way for someone to avoid death forever. It's always going to catch up in the end. The speaker tries to teach the reader, and it turns out one specific person, how to deal with death. It's not until the last stanza of the poem that the subject goes from broad to specific. It becomes clear that the poet is addressing his or her father and had him in mind the whole time. The poem is at once universal and specific. It applies to everyone, but at this moment it is for one person, the speaker's father. Stanza 1. In each stanza of Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, Dylan Thomas addresses a different aspect of the dying process before repeating one of the central refrains of the work. In the first stanza, the speaker expresses the desire to live as something fierce. Old age, they say, is a process of burning and raving, two images that are not commonly associated with old age. The conflicting images create a call to action early in the piece because Thomas and his speaker are willing to challenge typical associations in the minds of the readers. Stanza 2. The second stanza takes on a different approach, reminding the reader that despite the earlier commands, death is both inevitable and natural. It uses lightning as a symbol to describe the feeling of incompleteness that can accompany the aging process. When the wise men referenced feel that their words have forked no lightning, they are feeling as though they have not accomplished everything they set out to in their life. Because of this fact, they do not go gentle into that good night. Stanzas 3 and 4. The next 2 stanzas succinctly discuss a nearly opposite idea, namely that resisting death is also a natural phenomenon. Wise men, good men, and grave men all resist dying. Thomas continues to use a wide variety of symbols with both positive and negative connotations to reinforce the image of an aged man looking back on his life and realizing they have more to contribute to the world. In the third stanza, the good men cry, imagining how much more they could have done too late, now that they've realized they're dying. Following that, the grave men realize something similar, seeing with their blinding sight, looking back on their lives now that their mortality has granted them perfect clarity in retrospect. Stanzas 5 and 6. The poem concludes with an address to the speaker's father, with a conflicting plea to both curse and bless them with his tears. The conflicting images of the father's tears being both a curse and a blessing echo the earlier idea that death is something that is both natural and something to be railed against. The tears of the father are a curse because they strike the fear of mortality into his child, and a blessing because they remind that child to live their life to the fullest extent possible. Ultimately, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night is a poem that attempts to describe the author's complex relationship with his own mortality. This is certainly one of the most complex emotions an artist can attempt to describe in their work, and yet Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night remains one of Thomas's most famous poems for how well it succeeds in that endeavour. Structure and form. Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night is an example, and probably the most famous English example, of a villanelle, a form of poetry first conceived in 17th century France. Today, it is an uncommon poetic form, but still an effective one when used properly. The villanelle has a rigid form to it. It is a poem written in 6 stanzas, where the first 5 are tercets, and the final one is a quatrain. Furthermore, it is characterized by the appearance of 2 repeating refrains. The first refrain is always the first line of the first verse, and is repeated at the end of the second and fourth verse. The second refrain is the last line of the first verse, and is repeated at the end of the third and fifth verses. The first refrain is also the third line of the fifth verse. The refrains must rhyme with each other. As well, the second lines of each verse must rhyme with each other, and the first lines must rhyme with the refrains. As such, the rhyming pattern of a villanelle is always ABA, 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 ABAA. The villanelle is an uncommonly seen form of poetry because of the rules and requirements associated with it. Typically, this kind of poem takes advantage of its rigid repetition and is used to express some form of obsessive thought process. This poem is a strong example of the latter. I hope this video has provided you with a better understanding of the poem, its key themes and ideas, as well as some of the language and structural features. If you have found this video to be useful, please like and comment and perhaps share with your friends. Please also subscribe for similar content. See you in the next one.